My name is Tom Alexander. I am Deputy Communications Director for Mayor Emanuel here in Chicago. And I'll be moderating the government panel today, which we have a great group of folks from a variety of different industries and backgrounds. Pretty much the only thing all of us have in common is the University of Chicago, which is nice. So I think you'll get a really good perspective on different options if you're interested in going into government. And I'll just tell the panelists that at least half of the people in the audience have been interns in our office. So if they're dissuaded from government service because of this panel, that's a bad sign. Because they came back for the panel. Okay, so we'll start off, we'll each do sort of an introduction of ourselves briefly, and then we'll just kind of get into questions. Towards the end, we'll obviously open it up for questions from students or anybody else. And I'm hopeful that we'll just kind of have a freewheeling discussion where we talk about a lot of different things. So we'll get started. Just a little bit on my background. I went to the U of C, I graduated in 2000. I was a journalist and a small business person for a brief period of time, and then I switched gears into public policy. And in my career, I've worked in the governor's office, for the federal government doing disaster relief work, for the county government doing economic development, and now for the mayor in communication. So I've had experience at all the different levels of government. Let's all say kind of one thing about what we did during our time at the U of C and how that sort of shaped our career. So for me, I was fortunate I actually got a job as a reporter while I was in school. And so I was able to kind of start my career then as kind of a general assignment reporter. So that was how I spent a lot of my time while I was a student.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming out. My name's Christian Mitchell. I'm the state representative of the 26th district in the state of Illinois. Runs from Streeterville down to South Chicago, kind of along the lakefront. This is the part where I tell you that I always wanted to be in government, and it was always my plan, but I'm not going to lie to you because there's a camera in the back of the room, and that doesn't go well for politicians. I actually came to University of Chicago to major in economics. I was going to get an econ degree at U of C, a JD MBA from Harvard, start my own sports agency, marry Alicia Keys, and be really, really rich. Obviously, I'm off the beaten path. So what happened for me at U of C was that I met Will Burns, who's now a great mentor of mine, who is my alderman and was the predecessor in this seat. And Will basically convinced me that I could go off and be rich, but what was going to happen to other people like me who'd had some of the tough experiences I had growing up, the only child of a single mother who didn't have the same opportunities I did. So not having a student loan bill at that point, I listened and declined all my consulting offers and went into community organizing and political organizing. And from there, I met a bunch of folks who were influential in getting me to where I am now. So that's a little bit of my story, and I'm glad you all came out.
Hi, my name is Robin Moon, SB 96. I studied chemistry. At the college, I started out in management consulting and started venture capital management down on Wall Street for a total of like 6 years. Went to nonprofit and turned my direction slightly into public health. And until 5 business days ago, I was at the mayor's office in New York City in Bloomberg administration as senior health policy advisor at the City Hall. And I'm technically without a job right now. On Monday, I'm starting as a chief operating officer at Grameen PrimaCare. I don't know if you've heard of Grameen, like Grameen America Microfinance, that organization.
Hi, I'm Amanda Grady. I graduated in 2005. I double majored in bio and HIPS. I actually went into public health right after graduation. I got a master's in public health and then did public health research for 2 years. Realized that I liked what the lawyers were doing more, went to law school, and I'm now a presidential management fellow at the Food and Drug Administration. I do regulatory issues related to food ingredients. And actually it was the HIPS major that helped me realize that I could do something that intersected between law and science and policy.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Moskowitz. I'm the Outreach Director at the Citizens Utility Board, which is a nonprofit consumer advocacy group that specializes in utility issues, and we work throughout the state of Illinois. I started at the U of C in 1995. I graduated in 2000. After a very difficult first year, I ended up taking some time off and As it happened, my folks lived overseas, so I worked in the U.S. Embassy overseas for a year and came back. And the economy was such when I graduated that I had no idea what I wanted to do and started looking for a job after I graduated, which is not a luxury, I guess, we have much anymore. And I ended up getting the job at CUB, Citizens Utility Board, on their hotline. I've been there for 13 years now. Now I run the outreach department, a team of about 6 people, soon to grow within the next 2 weeks to about 8, at educating consumers and also running some programs here and there.
Excellent. All right, so let's start off with an easy question. Watching Chris Christie this week, what? Oh. You're 20 years old and you aspire to a career in politics. What does everybody need to learn from watching that? Let's use the term escapade. Just anybody. Don't be shy.
I haven't been watching the Chris Christie thing that closely, but I mean, it sounds like, assuming we believe that he didn't know what his staff was doing, that's terrible management. And actually, I was sitting in on one of the other panels before this, and the moderator asked the panelists, what's the worst thing that's happened to you at your job? And I know the worst thing that's happened to me at my job is one of the people who works for me basically was spied upon at an event we were doing, and it turned out that he did a really terrible job and was very unprofessional. And our grantor found out about this, and I was completely shocked. I had been giving this person a lot of leeway, giving him chance after chance, and he went and embarrassed me. And I learned a lot. If you want to go into politics, you are going to be a leader of people, you're going to be a manager, and you might think that you're doing people a favor by letting things slide and giving them maybe too much of free rein, and then you can find yourself in that position and they're getting themselves into some bad positions as well.
Anybody else?
Well, I think it's one thing, in government, it's one thing to be a politician, but it's another to be a really smart bureaucrat like I was, and I will be hopefully again. And I think it's all about accountability, openness among them and with the public. So that's on some of us here who may want to be policy advisors and aides and different levels of bureaucrats to support that.
It's just to follow up on that. I think that culture really matters. Government is an organization as much as it is anything else. So establishing a culture of accountability in your office is a really big thing. It's something I try to work at very actively. The other thing I'll say is some of my really great mentors, Tony Preckwinkle, Alderman Burns, et cetera, have always said to me, focus on the job you have and the future will take care of itself. I think that if indeed it turns out that this had something to do with punishment or retribution or anything like that related to wanting to drive up the score to increase national viability for a presidential election, that's an example of mission creep. That's an example of thinking about something other than just being the governor of New Jersey. Once again, all allegation, but if indeed that turns out to be the case, that's an example of you putting something other than your job performance in front of you, and that's a danger for all of us. All of us politicians have some level of ambition, and in some cases want to be something more than we are, and when you forget to do the job that you have, that's how you get in trouble.
So it's interesting, in almost every one of the intros, everybody said, I didn't necessarily intend to end up in government, or I didn't think from day one that I was going to be into public service. The folks in this room are already sort of pre-selected themselves with an interest in that. So what can they be doing now to capitalize on that interest to kind of best prepare themselves to transition into a career?
I'll start. I think it's important to remember that if you're working in government, you are working for the people, either the city or state, or at the federal level, you're working for the citizens of the country. And so you need to think about what's best for them, not what's necessarily going to vault your career ahead.
Anybody else? Okay.
Keep yourself clean. I'm serious. Like, be careful with Instagram, be careful with Twitter. I mean, like, these things all matter. We're at a point where basically anything you do is like collated and available online. So be careful what kind of decisions you make, because ultimately those things will surface in a campaign or will surface to your boss if indeed you end up working for a politician. Those things all matter. So if you're really serious and interested in government, you have to think about the personal sacrifices you're going to have to make to do this.
That's a good point. And something I would add to that is that by the time that you realize that your Facebook page has something on it that shouldn't be on there, it's already way too late for the internet. And you know, we had an example with the young man who had designed the city sticker. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but there was a big controversy surrounding whether or not there had been gang signs basically drawn in the city sticker. And from the the issue was compounded by the fact that there was a lot of pictures of this 13-year-old kid smoking marijuana and throwing up gang signs on his Facebook page. And by the time you could shut down the Facebook page, it had been screen captured and put like around the internet. And so it was just a good reminder for me that it's better to be preemptive than reactive in terms of that sort of thing. I think that's something that everybody can just kind of just take a look every couple of months and evaluate it from the lens of somebody who may someday be looking at hiring you. I think that's great advice. So what's the best thing about working in government or public service, and you cannot say any variation of serving the people, helping people, anything like that? So that's off the table. What's the best thing aside from that?
Well, in my job, it's that I'm not doing the same thing every day. I differ from the other folks on the panel because I don't work in the government. I work at a nonprofit organization, a very small one. We have about 25 people. And although I have a role, I do a little bit of everything, as does everybody else on staff. So I am actually, this is really cheesy to say, I'm really happy when I get up in the morning going to work because it's something different from what I was doing yesterday, and so it's endlessly interesting. And also, I feel like I'm doing some good, or at the very least, I'm not doing any harm to anybody. So that is, I'm sorry, I'm very sorry, that is a lot of it.
I was
okay?
going to guess to see how many people you could get through before somebody said helping people.
All right, cool. So I broke the
So it's
seal on
0.
that one. No problem. So, but it's the diversity of the of my tasks,
Right.
basically.
Okay, that's a good one.
It's not to say I didn't intend to be in government, I just ended up here, but I definitely didn't think I was going to be working for in public service or government when I was where you are. I went into government later because in the long-term vision, I know we should all know that things happen in the world the way they do because of a reason. Like it's no longer, I used to think like business people are crooks and government people are stupid and they do nothing. There's no such bifurcated line like that. There are a lot of smart people in the government. And in particular in Bloomberg administration, I've seen so many. So I believe in the vision of making changes in big scale, possibly citywide. And as you guys may follow New York City news, things that are done in New York that are successful, that's been replicated in other cities as well. So I believe in that kind of scalable approach. And number two, for me personally, I'm a public health professional. So, Bloomberg is known as a public health mayor, and there's many things we've done. If you heard of Smoke-Free Act all the way to soda, we're all behind it. It's about changing social norms and not only letting the corporate world set the norms for you guys, but government can partake in that too. So that was the vision that I saw.
Go ahead, ladies first.
I mean, to piggyback on that, everyone I work with in my office, scientists, regulators, are very passionate about what they do, and the food world is changing pretty quickly. I don't know if you've been following it. There's all sorts of new regulations coming out. There's also new science, and so trying to figure out how that all fits together is absolutely fascinating.
So I feel like I now need to start my answer by saying I'm not a crook. The thing I enjoy most, I think, about being an elected official is that when I decide I have something I'd like to speak on or like move the public debate on, I have the mechanism to do so. I can introduce a bill, I can bring policymakers together and get them talking about a topic. I was personally affected by the criminal justice system growing up, for example. I had an aunt who spent 4 years in prison, was later exonerated, had been accused of, convicted of murder, and was later released when it was found to be circumstantial evidence. I've seen firsthand kind of what happens with the criminal justice system in the state of Illinois. I'm now, in the next couple of weeks, going to be introducing a package of bills to start to deal with the war on drugs. And I get to do that because of the position that I'm in. And even before that, in working at the county for Toni Preckwinkle, I got to wake up in the morning and work on those issues because she's in control of the county jail. Or I watched my mother growing up working as a nurse. I got to work on healthcare issues because of the county health system. So every single day I get to explore a new way to make life better for people. Since I can't say freedom, Jesus, and apple pie, I'll go with that.
All right, that's fair enough. So I've heard a couple of times this concept of getting to do a little bit of everything every day, having different challenges ahead of you, kind of not knowing what the day brings, which is something I've experienced a lot in my career also. I have always felt like having gone to the University of Chicago in particular suited me well for that type of a job, that the types of experiences that I had at school forced me to kind of calibrate myself a little bit. And I guess my question for you is twofold. Is one, sort of what about your time at U of C prepped you for the types of things that you're experiencing on a day-by-day basis? And two, assuming that you can sort of train yourself to be ready for different types of challenges, different types of focuses between Monday and Tuesday, what are some things that everybody in this room should be thinking about doing?
I'll start. I've been a renegade all my life of different sorts. So I studied, I was telling Novia, I'm a very easy target for stereotype. I'm an Asian and I studied chemistry, so everybody thought I was pre-med. I wasn't. Came out of the closet of I'm not pre-med, mom and dad, during my senior year. So if one were to ask me, if any of you were to ask me, like, what exactly is it that you did at UChicago that school offered you that prepared you? There's no one right class or right internship, right next step necessarily to be that gold mine. Life is not two-dimensional. I've taken many, I know we praise Common Core, but that's really true. As a chemistry major, I got to take all sorts of, I wasn't even forced, I love taking those classes, and I've taken extra, like, things I did not need to take or even did well in. I took them anyway, and that will really carry you through the rest of your life. And I think that it's the transferable skills I've learned is to really come out of the university thinking, I can do this, I can learn new things, and just put me in a new environment and I can do this. And I also did extracurricular activities, like, I danced and I was in the orchestra, so I didn't do anything like practical. Like, I was not in a debate club. Not to say it's not a bad thing, I just didn't. And but I think that the diverse environment that you will throw yourselves into after you graduate, with the confidence that you will learn and thrive in, all those, I think that's I would say that's what the university offered me. And as to your next step, I know that you guys are all intentionally getting into government, but we're all thinking. I don't think anybody coming out of the university, any university, thinking I want to be a bureaucrat so I can paper push and do unglorious shredding in the back office. Nobody thinks that. You want to be like this big politician, you want to be this big name. But you will get there, but you're not going to get there 2 years from now. There's going to be different steps, and it could be 30 years in the government until you get there, or it could be some other sectors, and it could be corporate, it could be nonprofit, and all of your experiences will come together to support you to be who you will be later. So I really wouldn't think I need to have this very specific path I need to go through, otherwise it's not going to happen. I would not.
Be flexible, basically.
Yeah, very open-minded.
I want to piggyback off that. I think that that's absolutely true, and I think that the general skill set you get at U of C is very valuable. And more than that, the biggest thing that I always say I got from University of Chicago when people ask me that question is my recollection at U of C was that no kind of axiom, tenet, or truth was too sacred to be questioned. That like everything you ever thought, every experience you've had was open to be questioned. And I think that's really valuable, not just in government, but in a changing world with rapid access to information where there are new perspectives that can come in instantly. The ability to kind of take all that information, disentangle it, and articulate new best practices is really, really valuable. And the other thing that at least I certainly learned, and it may not be true for everyone here, I learned I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, and that there were going to be a whole bunch of rooms I'd be in where I wasn't the smartest guy in the room, and the key was how do you listen to everyone around you, because there's somebody with a really articulate perspective that you completely disagree with that you can learn from. And I think that's the thing that I most got out of University of Chicago, and the thing that serves me best in my job every day.
What's the worst thing about your job? And you can't say that you make less money than a person doing a different type of work. Any person doing any other type of work.
In my job, I am confronted with the limitations of what we can do every day. We can do a lot to advocate for more funding for low-income people so they don't get their heat shut off, or we can talk to our utility contacts on behalf of somebody who needs a reasonable payment arrangement, or we can get some better efficiency programs passed in the state. But there's still going to be a lot of people out there who are cold right now. And we get calls. When I started at Cub on our hotline, I got calls from people who were about to be disconnected, and it was just because they owed $100. And it was like, God, if I could just give you $100. And just being confronted with those limitations every day is hard to take sometimes.
I think the toughest thing is trying to figure out how to make a decision when you know that you're not going to be able to please everybody all of the time. I work for a regulatory agency. Industry might want us to do one thing. Advocacy group might want us to do another. There might be science to support either decision, but we have to pick one.
To continue with that, the most frustrating part is, so when there are different things, you got to choose from, it's the priority setting, and priorities often set by political interest, the government, and I'm like this quasi-scientist, public health person, but the evidence shows that is not the case. But, at the end of the day, it's a decision of a strong leader, very strong leader. I mean, all for the good reason. Conversely, I can say the same thing about, the most exciting part of my life is, with that really strong leadership, things do make, you can make things happen. But when some things need to happen, like PrimaCare, some people need heat, like after Hurricane Sandy, like Rockaway, the most needed residents were still without electricity. Decisions are made, not necessarily for the most needy, but for some political reasons. So, but that's why I went into the government, to learn how things happen the way they do.
I'd say two things. One is the pace, just the pace of change. There are a whole bunch of different ways in which the public and public opinion evolves a heck of a lot faster than government often does. And that's, part redistricting in these very isolated pockets where legislators aren't accountable to kind of the broader society. And a whole bunch of other stuff. So the pace of change is often kind of difficult and kind of frustrating. And the other thing is actually 2-year terms. I mean, I run on a 2-year term, which effectively means I run every 9 months, which is a problem I think we see in the United States Congress, is that everybody's focused on kind of their next piece of mail, their next television commercial, instead of kind of a longer term vision. And that's true in the legislature in Springfield as well.
So I'm afraid to ask this question, but what would be the solution to that?
To what? The term?
I mean, what's the alternative?
So this is funny because
the answer is keep representatives in the U.S. Congress for.
There's a camera in the room. Don't forget.
So let me not show for
that's
the.
your answer.
Let me not show for the U.S. Congress. I think it's a couple of things. I think. One is I do think 2-year terms are a little nonsensical, but I don't think that's kind of the base of the problem. I think one is civil society has changed quite a bit. I mean, from like the way democracy was established back in the Revolutionary War times, when everyone went to the town meeting, and well, not everyone, not women and African Americans, but everyone else went to the town meeting, and like we're one person, one vote, and all those things. Everyone participated, and so you weren't doing the same kind of heavy advertising campaigns you have to do nowadays. People were more informed, more engaged on issues, and therefore you could have a longer, more substantive debate. So in part, we need better politicians. In part, we need people to really re-engage and for voter participation and go up in awareness. And I think when those things go up, you have more accountable politicians to the electorate. So mix of both.
Interesting. Okay, so a couple of times we've heard scalability mentioned, and Robin, you in particular mentioned some of the public health programs from the Bloomberg administration, some of which have seen remarkable scalability, like smoking, and then you have other ones like the soda-related. The ones I think that have shown a lot of scalability is the smoking-related ones and the calorie-related ones you see everywhere, which is really amazing. And some of them, like the soda ones, have been a little bit slower to be adopted. And so my question for you first, and then for anybody else who wants to answer it, is if you're working on sort of a local level, are you successful if you just affect your populace? Are you successful if you just affect your population? Or is there some need for it to be recognized and scaled and moved out beyond your jurisdiction for it to be truly successful?
Beyond New York City, for example, in this case, yeah. I'll talk about the soda. The soda deal is not over. We've gone back to the court. It's so, de Blasio administration will address it. It's not quite dead of a case, but we are proud with the fact that because of that controversy in New York City, I think that it's not an exaggeration to say the entire world is talking about it. Mexico City just passed a soda tax new law, and I just happened to be traveling last summer to Indonesia, Malaysia, and I would tell people, they would ask me what I do, and I would say, I don't know if you've heard of the name Bloomberg, he's a mayor, I work for him, and they would say, oh, the soda, everybody knew.
They moved their big gulp behind their back, and they couldn't take
and
two steps away.
Yeah, everybody, and every single friend or acquaintance I have in New York City, every time I identify my job, and they will say, you behind the soda thing, aren't you? So everybody's talking about why they agree with it, why they don't. So the whole public discourse has started. There are research papers, policy papers. The whole discussion has been stirred up, and there's some other countries and other cities, not just at the civil society level, but at the government level. It's become an issue, foundations talk about it. So that alone, I think that the kind of attention that we're able to gather in the world, we consider that as a success.
That's really interesting, the idea that you don't necessarily need to measure the outcome about a law, other people adopting the same law. I mean, there are a lot of different ways to look at these issues. So that's a really interesting answer. I think that's one that's relevant even if you're in school and you're starting to think about a career, that there's a lot of different ways to, have an impact through government or government-related organizations. So I think that's a very relevant point. Sarah, you look like you're inching towards the mic.
Well, when in the energy industry, and when we talk about scalability or energy efficiency, we talk about creating a program that, if it is not self-sustaining financially at first, can become so. And so we do a lot of piloting things with explicitly written into the work plan is, evaluating for scalability and making sure that this is worth stepping into and can be broadened and can support itself moving forward, and maybe can be used as a model in other markets. And that's just essential for the survival of, say, certain efficiency programs. Which is my field. Sorry, when I get in front of a microphone, I always want to go into a spiel about energy efficiency, but I'm not going to, because that's my job. And also it helps us from a lobbying standpoint. Our organization, we do program development and management, but we also do lobbying in Springfield. Hey. And
13 different laws were just
I'll give you my card.
It's a Saturday.
Whatever, you're wearing a suit. You're never off camera.
Well, that's
So,
depressing.
so it helps if we've done a pilot, say, that only covers the west side of Chicago and it meets with success, then we are better equipped to go to decision makers and say, hey, this got success, will you give us a grant, or to a business, will you donate some programmable thermostats, et cetera.
Interesting. So Amanda, earlier you mentioned you're a regulatory agency, which means you need to make a decision in most cases, and it's going to be yes or no. Do you ever find that frustrating, that you're in an environment where you have to have an outcome? I mean, I think that my sense is that when most folks look at government and look at jobs in government, they would see that as a good thing. And I'm wondering, is there that, that government is held accountable and that they're going to make a decision? You may not necessarily like it, but there's going to be a yes or no answer at the end of the day. Are there situations in which that's frustrating, or where you think that sort of undermines the overall goal of the endeavor? How do you sort of deal with that in your role?
Well, I mean, it's not just what's yes or no, but it's also what does the law authorize us to do? And so we still have that constraint around us. I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing. I can't think of a better way to have it set up, but it's challenging, but that's also what makes it interesting.
Let's talk about social media for a second. So I will give my reflection that I thought about a lot in my career, which specifically relative to Facebook, but I think it applies to pretty much any social media outlet. What I found is that on the one hand, social media has opened up a level of communication, obviously, that never existed before. That's not a secret to anybody here. And the ability for sort of like instantaneous communication and feedback is remarkable. There's no doubt about that. The thing that pisses me off about Facebook is that the people who respond, particularly when you're talking about governmental efforts, come from the extreme viewpoints on both sides, right? So like nobody ever goes on their Facebook page to be like, well, I'm kind of for this and kind of against it, but I just really need to get my 2 cents of, apathy recorded for the public. Like that's not why you go and post a Facebook post. So what I found is that you have the most remarkable way of engaging people, and all the loonies are the ones who are using it to interact with government specifically. And I think it's probably more profound in government than it is, let's say, in entertainment as a counterbalance. And I'm wondering, what have been your guys' experience with social media? This generation of students is like really the first generation that has truly grown up with social media, right? I mean, I didn't even have Facebook when I was in college. That's so embarrassing to say, but it didn't even exist for several years after I got out of college. So, for students who are growing up in the social media era where it's a part of your life, there's no longer a debate about whether or not it's a good way for people to communicate. It's just how do you best use it? What's been your experience with it, and how's that going to kind of evolve over the coming years?
Well, at our organization, it's a major job to monitor our social media presence. Our communications team takes care of that, and they are on it all day just to make sure there's not something completely wacky sitting up there and, growing. But you got to do it. I mean, if we didn't, there's a flip side too, and we can spread the word about what we're doing. We can mobilize people and tell them to take action and call their legislators or come to an event, and so that's great. And we could fill it up with a lot of interesting stuff that's happening. I am biased. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the utility realm in Illinois, although I may be kind of weird for thinking that. But there's also a lot of weird stuff going on too. A lot of people being not just angry at the utilities, but have some really, really wacky, I would say, ideas about what's going on, especially regarding smart meters and things like that. And so really have to keep a close eye on it. And sometimes it's a major chore and we're all just like, oh God, can't we just burn it down? But you got to do it. It's really important.
I think information sharing purpose and community organizing purpose, for those purposes, I don't need to tell you how useful it is. but I also think that it's a tool, so you have to be discerning how to be smart about it. And I just think that sometimes, Facebook especially, but Twitter's too, sometimes people tend to waste time going crazy about some racist comment. I mean, that happens every day. Like, I think that, so in those cases, I think that Twitter, is used kind of productively to take your energy and time away from actually focusing on something useful. Like let him or her be racist, move on, like do your thing. I think that there's obviously balance in that.
I think it's mostly just a medium. I think that when you I think you're exactly right, Tom, when you talk about kind of the extremes on either end. But I think that's in a lot of ways we're just reflective of kind of our politics nowadays, and that we've got this really large silent middle. The most disturbing survey I've seen in probably the last 6 months was one by the Harvard School of Government that did a survey of Kennedy School students and said that basically our generation, I'm 27, I'm class of '08, is the most altruistic generation ever. And only 18% of Kennedy School of Government students view government as a viable vehicle for social change. That was like, whoa. I mean, it really made me sit back. And what it says to me is there's a whole bunch of people who are, more moderate, who agree with Democrats sometimes and Republicans sometimes, and they're the people who are just consuming information on Facebook but not really participating because they're figuring that government isn't really relevant to their lives. So I need to track it and know what's going on in terms of how it's going to affect my stock prices and some other stuff, but for the most part, I'm just going to sit and watch like Glenn Beck over here and somebody else on the left over here and just go, wow, those people are crazy.
Yeah.
And now to check my friends' photos.
Right. And that's the best case scenario.
Right.
It's interesting what you said about people not seeing government as a vehicle for change, because there's definitely that sentiment out there right now, right, that government is broken, let's say. You hear quite a bit, and whether they're talking about Washington, D.C., or whether they're talking about other types of government or levels or whatever, you hear it quite a bit. But yet you still have, A, ton of people who are interested in going into government, B, a ton of people who are interested in politics more broadly. So I've found a little bit of a disconnect between sort of like what I experience on a interpersonal level and what you kind of hear out there, right? People are clearly dissatisfied with government, and yet nobody questions whether there will be government in 10 or 15 years. So for folks who are just at the beginning of their career, how do they sort of overcome that kind of large-scale institutional bias and really have a rewarding experience? Because I know a ton of people who love being in government and think that being in government was the best decision that they ever made, whether they made it on purpose or whether they made it by happenstance. And so how do you kind of deal with this fact that there's some folks out there who are like, really, you're going to go and work for City Hall? Like, they're the problem. You know what I mean?
I've actually found that people say that they hate the government, they hate a particular agency, but they're totally fine with the individual people working there. So I have to keep reminding myself that it's not me, it's the organization. They're not directing their anger toward me personally, but it's definitely tough.
I mean, so I believe in government. It's why I'm in government. I know Tom kind of forbid us, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are a lot of places to make a hell of a lot more money than I'm making right now, not having to travel back and forth to Springfield. And that's true of everyone here. Everyone on this panel could have done something else. So as corny as it sounds, and I'm not going to say like hope and change, you really do have to believe in government and understand that government, like anything else, is a vessel, and that what you get out of it is a product of what and who you put into it. In part, the problem we have in government is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everyone says the only people who go into government, the only people who run for office are people who are just in it for their own interests. The problem is that if everybody says that, the only people left to go into government are people who only go into government for their own interests. It is literally a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then you get these folks who rail against government, how bad and awful and inefficient it is, who then go into government, do their best to like shut down government, and then say, look, government shut down, it's inefficient, it's wasteful. It's like, well, yeah, because you're there, bro. Like, that's why it's inefficient and wasteful. So you have to believe in the institution, I do, for example, while also reserving the right to critique it, the right to say it can be better, it can be more than it is, there are ways in which we need to correct ourselves. But it doesn't mean that you don't believe in the institution, because government, frankly, is our largest publicly held interest, all of us. We are all involved in government in some way, shape, or form. And if we abandon our hope in government, we are effectively abandoning our hope in each other. And I'm off my soapbox.
That's a good answer, though.
I think I could be a little biased or limited in my view, because I worked in Bloomberg administration, which was, I would say, pretty unique compared to New York's previous, like say Giuliani or Dinkins. Like I said before, the bifurcation between government people who do government and people who do something else, the line is a lot more blurred than ever before. And I think one of many ways to restore our hope, I think, is to diversify people who work in the government. Like, I think in traditionally the bureaucrats, or seriously those people who sit, you know, like out of college, the urban fellowship to like, I don't know, 30, 35 years and nothing else. So you get to be in your own world and silo, and you don't really know how, you know, the rest of the world works. I don't think that's the case anymore. And I've seen the hyper example of how that's not the case anymore in New York City. There's a ton of smart people with various experiences. I mean, you may think that I'm a little all over the place, but you know, there are people who run Goldman Sachs, like, retired from it, now they're deputy mayors, and you know, a lot of law school graduates, like JDs, by the way, are at the government, if that's information useful to you. Ton of people who have gotten, you know, advanced degrees. Not that schooling is the most important thing, but you know, it is pretty important. All those people with their like-mindedness run the government together, and they believe in their city or state or wherever they live in. So I think that's the first step, and I've seen it, and that can be, you know, your future as well. And it does not have to be like some special person being a government person.
I think that comment about diversity is a really interesting one. To me, I agree that is one of the greatest things about government in this country specifically. And the other place in this country, by the way, where diversity is embraced and fostered is at universities. And places like the University of Chicago are leaders in that effort. And those are really like the two areas of America that have made the most profound commitment to fostering diversity in every facet, in who is there, and who works there, and who you serve, and how you go about serving those people. And the result of it is that you've had this kind of remarkable mix of ideas and opportunities that you don't organically have in every single case. And you can point to lots of industries, you can point to lots of places that are so homogeneous that it's disturbing. And we live in a city that has lots of pockets of extreme homogeneity, and you walk into City Hall and it's completely reflective of the city. And the services that are provided are completely reflective of the people who live in the city. And if you walk around the campus of the University of Chicago, it's a very diverse place also. And I think that's kind of an interesting point. So if you guys have questions, you should start lining up. I'll ask kind of a couple more as we kind of transition into the student question, but it'd be great to hear from you guys, so start lining up. As they do that, let me ask about television programs. I guess we can do movies also, but I was talking with somebody the other day who was talking about the curse of the West Wing, which is basically that everybody under the age of, let's say, 40 who is associated with government wants to be either Sam Seaborn, Toby, or CJ, and writes every speech as though they're Bartlett announcing his re-election. And I'm wondering, aside from West Wing, which I think a lot of people have embraced as, albeit a little bit of a caricature, a show that really kind of aspires to some of the ideals that gets people really into public service, what are other programs related to government that you've watched that you either like or that you think are a terrible example for students. And I'll start with the show Boss, which I don't know if any of you guys watched, for its 2 short-lived seasons on Stars or Encore or whatever. A dubious distinction if you can't make it past 2 seasons on Stars. So I love that show. It was about the mayor of Chicago, and I was working for the mayor of Chicago, and I'd come home after these like excruciating weeks, and there's this ridiculous show on TV where everybody's having sex with each other all the time, and I was like, all right, this is like really an entertaining and completely
Fiction.
not fact-based. Like the ugliest person on the show is more attractive than the most attractive person I ever see in my life, and so I'm like, that is a show, though, that really sort of captured for me this idea of power, and that a lot of people get into government for one reason or another because they like the palace intrigue and they like the power and they like the access and stuff like that, and that at the end of the day, that's really kind of not the reason to do it, and that you sort of have to always be guarded against those types of lures because it's very, very difficult to know when you're crossing the line. But when you look back on it, you're like, oh, no, that was it. Right there, I shouldn't have done that. And so that was something for me to kind of help me think, okay, every day when I go to work, it may not be as exciting as it is on Encore, but it's something that I should be approaching with like kind of a real seriousness.
I'll
Just
go
throwing them out.
next.
Go ahead.
I would say The Wire. I mean, I don't work in the city at the city level, but just I think it does a really good job of showing how everything within that city is interconnected. I mean, there's a focus on the media, the citizens of the city, how the police department works, everything, the mayor's office. I just thought I did a really good job of showing that.
Definitely The Wire.
All right, so I agree with The Wire. I think The Wire is clearly like one of, if not the greatest shows of all time. I'm gonna say Game of Thrones. Hold on.
Total UFC answer,
Hold
by the
on.
way.
No, the
Total UFC answer.
The UFC answer would have been Battlestar Galactica, which you should all watch too, but that's a whole different thing. The reason I say Game of Thrones is that I think it's, so obviously the violence is pretty sensational. It's not quite pornographic, but the differences are kind of slim. The bigger point is that I think it's a warning against kind of ideological purity. I think that, if you guys haven't seen it, I'm sorry to ruin it, but I think there's a reason Ned Stark gets his head chopped off. And it's not that he's not like... Sorry guys, Ned dies, I'm sorry.
You ruined my weekend.
I'm really sorry about
I'm gonna
that.
call my wife and you're gonna explain to her. No, I'm just kidding.
So anyway, but my point is that part of the thing that Tom and I were talking about in the questions and other people have addressed in the panel is this whole idea of like, people who wake up every single day and are like, I'm on the side of angels, you are on the side of devils, I am fighting the holy war for God, and therefore I will fight until the last. Or like making Darth Vader references on the floor of the US Senate. Like this is like the part of the problem with our politics, and I think that in part, what you see in that show is the characters who are like more pragmatic, who are like, good but practical, or like really evil but not like I like evil so much that I'll do evil even when it's bad for me, tend to succeed. So I'm going to stop now because I'm already too deep into this answer, but that's why I said Game of Thrones.
Do you want to offer one?
Well, half of my life I spent fighting Comcast and AT&T, so I do not have cable.
Okay.
But I grew up,
Wow.
so I'm sorry.
That's devotion.
I'm also very cheap for reasons that have been touched upon. I'll just say most of what I know about being a manager I learned from Jean-Luc Picard.
Okay.
Can I add something though? Seriously, I know that those dramas really make government workers look sexy, and it's really not. My office
too.
has leaks like that. My carpets are rolling from the corners because it's wet. It's been wet once or twice, and it's not glamorous. And I know you're gonna like rebuke me for this, but
No.
you have to love public service. You have to. You will be a junkie once you get there. You're gonna want to keep on coming back, and that's great. After all things are said and done, nothing but all these unattractive things. I'm telling you, and your desk also, is crumbling in your desk, like your chair is smelly. Even after all that, you still want to be in public service. That's how you know you love it, and you have to love public service.
I just want, can I piggyback on that real quick? So, your chair crumbling and the fact that my office is like half the size of my apartment, which is already a studio, like, we're not, so that part, but also just, go into government, especially if you start on some of like the campaign side. Like I know we're talking about government, but in a lot of cases you work on campaigns, you end up doing government as well, or you love government, so you do campaigns. If you are prepared to do anything for the cause, you will do significantly better. Most people here have probably heard the phrase in Chicago, we don't want nobody who nobody sent. That's actually not quite true. It's really more, we don't want nobody who nobody sent who thinks they're somebody. So like the first campaign office I ever walked into, like I am a third year University of Chicago public policy student. So I am here to be Toby Ziegler, Josh Lyman, whoever else. I'm here to advise the campaign on policy. That's what I'm going to do. So I walk in, and the candidate's like a pretty good friend of mine. It's Will, who was my mentor and was running for office for the first time. And, I'm wearing a suit and everything. And he goes, Mitchell, that's a real interesting outfit to walk precincts in. That's ambitious. And I was knocking on doors and making phone calls and doing all that fun stuff, even though I was a UFC student, so I'm there to advise on policy. But it taught me humility. It taught me a whole bunch of other stuff that I needed to learn. And when you do that, you learn that you are not more important than the cause. You're not more important than the organization. It's a really valuable lesson for government because it makes you understand that you are there to contribute. The thing is not about you.
Totally. I think that, and I'm worried that there's going to be injuries because of the people rushing to the microphone, so I'll filibuster for a minute with some comments about your guys' answers. I think that having worked in the government but also worked in private sector jobs and run my own business and stuff like that, look, every job, up to and including being a Major League Baseball player or a cowboy, which are the two best jobs that you can get, is going to suck sometimes. And there's going to be some days where you don't want to go out and get out of bed. I'm sure that there are days where Mark Zuckerberg doesn't want to get out of bed because he just isn't into it that day. And for me, what I found is that this idea of public service is a real good way of kind of motivating yourself to get through some of those doldrums that you're going to inevitably experience in your career. There's a little something extra there that is involved. So that's one anecdote that I'll make. The second is on this kind of government is not glamorous issue. I think you're absolutely right, that if you're looking for these sort of accoutrements of the leather-backed chair and the other sorts of things, it's not the line of work for you. And it's also like you don't walk in the first day and, write the bill that's going to change 24 million people's quality of life. I always ask people, have you seen the episode of West Wing where Sam spends 4.5 hours in a meeting about fire safety policy checking his BlackBerry? No, you haven't, because it would be the most boring episode of television ever. But that happens every single day in government offices around the country. And so we like to joke in our office that it's a little bit of West Wing and a little bit of Parks and Rec. And we kind of try and keep it interesting and do a lot of different types of things, but there are sort of mundane types of things that you see in government all the time.
Thought I'd ask a question for you guys. You spoke a little bit about the diversity of government. Could you guys speak a little bit to the benefits maybe of doing work outside of government, picking up expertise in something other than political science, like specific technical hard skills, and how that can be beneficial when applying that to government and kind of diversifying maybe your career, just like differences in career tracks and that
That's a
sort
good
of
question.
thing.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, first of all, you need to acknowledge that the diversity is embraced. They welcome people who are not just doing one thing all their lives, but people who come from all walks of life. So that should be encouraging, for you to want to do other things. The most critical skill is not the fact that you majored in political science in undergrad. Yeah, there's definitely hard skills. I mean, I don't know if I was in poli science. I don't know if you have to take statistics course. That's better than not having taken it. But I think it's the ability to critically think that's totally underappreciated, overlooked. Just because you went to top whatever Ivy League school, you don't necessarily learn how to think critically. always question why not, pick things apart. That comes from training, just like working out. Like you have to train every day to think that way, and that's going to be part of you. That's going to be your second nature, and that's I find that's like one of the most important skills that you take away from the university. And speaking of majoring, I'm exaggerating when I say like your poli-sci major means nothing, but it kind of means not a lot. There's a graduate school degree inflation. So a lot of people go get degrees to further their career, and I think that's really valuable. But you should make sure that you want to go into a certain graduate school program for a reason, for a purpose. You shouldn't just go back to school just to get another degree. And to do that, I think again the critical thinking skill is coming into play, right? So like to decide what you want to do, where you want to go, that kind of thing. So so my long answer to your short question. So that I think we're not at a I said it to somebody earlier too. We don't come to University of Chicago for vocational training. We're here at a liberal arts college to learn how to expand our mind and think critically. So I think that's like I studied chemistry and I got a job with management consulting, and then like I went to nonprofit, and people hire me because they thought that I could learn and I guess jive with it. So I wouldn't be so hung up on what major I need to have. Otherwise, like my life is going to be ruined. I'm never going to be able to work in government. It's not like that.
Yeah, I think your question is actually a really great one, because I think that government is one area that really embraces people who've gone out and done something different. And so every organization is about building the team that's going to make you the most successful. And that's true at Goldman Sachs, and that's true in City Hall, and that's true in every hospital or any other place where people go to work. The difference with government is that I would say is twofold. One is that you don't necessarily know the challenges you're going to be facing down the road. And they may be very, very, very different than what you thought they were going to be. Some things that I've worked on extensively during my 2.5 years in the mayor's office. Taxi reform. I know so much about taxis, it's sick. Healthcare policy, specifically relative to pet coke, this weird sort of byproduct that's being talked about on every television station. Never had any inclination that I would be working on that sort of thing. Jobs announcements with companies that are moving very specific technology jobs to the city of Chicago and working with them on their economic incentives packages, right? So like random things that I had no background in and no real desire or interest to know about, but I was in a position where they basically said, we think that you're gonna make a good decision and a smart decision when it comes time to make that decision. That's really what the challenge is, and that's the same for every one of our jobs. The only thing is in these types of public service jobs, I think they're a little bit more willing to hire somebody who's got kind of a crazy background than they are in let's say a financial services firm where you have to have specific experience doing certain types of transactions to be prepared to make those types of decisions, right? And so in government, coming from a different background, in any sort of public service job, nonprofit, lobbying, whatever, having a different background is seen as a major asset. And I think people like the idea like, oh, that guy worked at Goldman Sachs, that person ran a small business, that person is a chemist, and those three people are sitting together talking about taxi reform. And that's a good thing, right? That's not like the sky is falling thing. That's like we've put ourselves in a good position for success because we've got these people coming at it from very different backgrounds, but we just know that they're going to approach it with kind of a critical analysis. So I think that's a great thing. And the other thing I think is that there's certain types of jobs where if you go out and you do them and you go pretty far along in your career in a certain area, you can still come into public service at sort of like a policy specific position where that experience is going to be really relevant and really valuable. Or there's other jobs like mine in communications where being a little bit more of a generalist is an advantage. So I think that one of the good things about government, any choice you make is the right choice.
Can I add one more thing? I think you and I come from a mayor's office, so that's, and then you're the elected official, so it's a little different for agencies compared to what we did at the City Hall. So there's Department of Health, public health professionals, like really experts work there. Department of Environmental Protection, a lot of engineers work there. Sanitation, education, public policy, education policy. So yeah, there is a little bit of specificity in those agency level work. Like FDA is also food policy, environmental law, but also, like you say, if you go in as a senior level, which will happen to you later, your job becomes a little more specific. You need to know very much about a few things. But right now, what you learn in university is very general, and that is just fine.
Amanda, do you want to comment on the idea of the agencies?
Sure. I
Seeking a
mean,
different type of person.
at least within my own office, I don't work with anyone with a poli-sci background. I'm the only one with any sort of social sciences training, so I need to be able to look at proposed legislation and talk about how that would affect our office. I also need to sit through that 5-hour meeting with a group of chemists and know what they're talking about, or at least know what questions to ask them so they can explain what they're talking about. I think kind of a side note is that one of the things I think that U of C really trains you well on with the Common Core is that you learn how to write, and you learn how to communicate with people who may not have the same training and background that you have. And I think that is probably one of the most important skills that you can bring to any government job.
The learning how to write thing at U of C is the truest. That, the critical thinking, and the other one is time management. I will tell you right now, if you survive being an undergraduate at U of C and do well, you can survive without doing well. But if you survive and do well at U of C, you will, in that process, learn time management, but you should be thinking every single day about your time and how you're learning to manage your time and how that's going to affect your career. Because I will tell you, my job is 50% wake up in the morning and figure out how to shoehorn as many days worth of work as I can into however many hours I'm going to be at work that day, and still keep a few minutes aside for goofing around with my colleagues to keep the atmosphere civil. It's just, a lot of it is about time. And as we get more efficient and as life gets faster, it becomes even more paramount that you're able to sort of manage your time. And so I think that's an area where if you want to start focusing on something tomorrow, tonight, start thinking about how you're managing your time. Start thinking about how you're wasting your time, and just kind of cultivate those skills. Let's talk briefly about communications before we do our closing arguments. So I'm a communications person. Sarah, you're in a communications role. We're obligated by contract to say that communications is the most important part of government and public service. But I actually really believe that it's where the rubber meets the road. It's where the organizations interact with the public, and that's really what government and public service is all about. But I'm hopeful that each person can sort of reflect on how communicating and how communications has affected your particular role. And you can start since you're doing it all day.
Yeah, so at CUB, it's really important on all levels of what we do to be able to communicate. The people who man our hotline have to be able to talk people down who might be in a frantic state, which requires those skills. We have to be able to make arguments to our contacts at utilities, and we have to be able to articulate sometimes very, very dry, esoteric matters to consumers directly in the written form, public speaking, talking one-on-one over the phone. And also our lobbyist has to do that too. A lot of what he does is explain this stuff, which oftentimes doesn't make much sense to the layperson at first, to legislators in a compelling way to get them to do the right thing. So, I mean, that is the bread and butter of what we do. That's what we're always trying to convince somebody to do something, whether it's a decision maker or it's a consumer, or whether it's a TV station to try to get us get us on the air.
No, I agree. I mean, we have to communicate with other agencies that also have a role in regulation. We have to communicate, we have to justify our decisions to members of Congress, to people higher up in the administration. We have to communicate with other offices. I mean, yeah, if you can't do that, I don't know how anything would get done.
My job at the City Hall was mostly internal communication, but it involved a lot of intersectoral, interagency communication. So I'm going to drive my point about diversity to home today. So for me to be able to talk to 12 different agencies and commissioners of agencies about what they have in it for a certain initiative with like shoestring budget, we have to convince them. So in order to talk in their language, you gotta learn, and your diversity of your background comes in really handy, because if you don't have it in your experience, it's just gonna be book knowledge, it's gonna be impossible. So that's really important. And the one time that, it's a long period of time, that I got to talk to external parties was with Hurricane Sandy. I had to talk to pharmacies, to bring their trailers, to open Rockaways where it just got flooded completely, and including pharmacy buildings. Occupy Sandy, like Occupy Wall Street, we had protesters outside City Hall, and I had to be on a conference call with 30 of them every day for 30 days, 7 days a week, and they're mostly yelling at you the whole time. Very uncomfortable, but you have to find this art. There's this art of convincing them that we're all in it together. It's about the common purpose. That's what we do at the City Hall. But again, if you've never talked to any community organizer ever before, or if you've never talked to corporate people before, it's going to be, not to say impossible, but it's going to be very challenging. So I think going out there to get experience, that whatever interests you, you have to first love it when you go out and get experience. But yeah, to learn the communication skills comes from your experience.
Can I build on that really quickly before we moved on? When I went to U of C, I got really good at writing, but I never had to do any kind of public speaking. I was very good at one-on-one, and I was telling somebody earlier that my mom thinks it's hilarious that most of my job now is public speaking and talking to large groups of people. And don't be worried about that if you're looking into a job that can kind of take you there. I mean, some people are naturally gifted at it, but it is something that can be learned also with just a tiny bit of practice.
So my grandfather always used to say that you have two ears and one mouth, act accordingly, and it's totally true. Especially so, communications. The thing I've learned, and that I would emphasize to all of you, is a two-way street, and that it's just as important not only to communicate your message, but to listen to people, to know where they are, to know where they're coming from, so that you can attune your message in a way that they can hear. Because the messenger and the message and all of those things are just as important as being right on the issue and what you're talking about. And I've had several instances where I've had to, say, take a difficult vote and had to call, not only individual voters, but also, unions or corporate folks or all these folks. And what I'll often hear and tells me I've done my job right is, Christian, I don't agree with you, but I understand where you're coming from. And I really appreciate you reaching out. And it helps you build your brand and build your integrity when people know that not only are you calling them and saying your piece, but you're also legitimately listening to what they have to say and taking it into account. So remembering that it is a two-way street, that you should be listening a lot more than you're speaking, is huge.
Excellent. Okay, so let's just do one last question to kind of wrap things up. I think everybody here is convinced that they need to go into public service and that it is a wonderful, rewarding area. So we will skip that one and we'll just say, what surprised you the most in your career? Or what's one thing that's really surprised you? We'll start with Christian and go down, and then I will reserve the right to comment at the end. So let's just do quick, 30-second to a minute. What one thing that surprised you?
Wow. One thing that surprised me, I think the 24-hour nature of the work, and I know I should have known better, but I think just like the fact that you are always, so I'm at the gym, like jumping rope, like I'm literally jumping rope, and a guy comes up to me and starts talking to me about pension reform or something like that, and I'm like, dude, I'm kind of, it's 5:45 in the morning, and this guy's talking to me, and it just made me realize, like, look, this job is full-time, all the time, 100%, and people expect of you to be there and always be ready for them. And I know I should have known that, but it was still, literally I was jumping rope. So it was a really interesting thing to learn.
Um, Coming into public service, like I said before, it's not about the money or anything else but love for public service. I knew that in theory, and that happened to me, later in life. But as I left the Bloomberg administration, it's kind of like graduating because senior staff at the city hall kind of left together, or we leave different. Like somebody's leaving next week, and some people left before me. There's a very interesting solidarity among all of us, and I never thought that I would. Since 1996, since I left the university, I've held a number of jobs, and I never say to myself, I've never said to myself, like, I'm gonna come back here, like, I'm gonna come back and work here. Like, you move on and that's it, like, there's more exciting things happening. I said that I would come back, and I never thought I would, but it's not inconceivable that I would come back to public service. It's in some other administration. So I call myself public service junkie. And that may happen to you too, so watch out for that. There's something very special in being a public servant. I love calling myself a public servant. Rewarding sounds really cheap compared to what I really want to express. It's kind of, words fail me, but it's a privilege. And even the bad day will be a good day for you because you learn something new. It's a challenging day, and it's not about you. It's never about you, and that's why your bad day doesn't have to be personal to you. So that's what's surprising to me. Like, I'm gonna keep all my colleagues, and in my contact list, we're gonna be in touch, and I'm gonna come back.
That's a good answer.
I think it's kind of hard to pick one thing. I did not have any idea how much things could differ day to day. I mean, I've had to use what I learned in organic chemistry. I've had to use what I've learned in law school. I mean, I walk in the morning and I don't know what's going to be in my inbox that I have to deal with. And some of that is because, priorities are set way above me. But I think there's this popular image of government bureaucrats just sitting around pushing paper around on their desks, and that is definitely not true. There's always something going on that has to be dealt with.
Surprising. I've had all this time to think about it, and it's
I know,
still
right?
hard.
It's
It's a tough one, Tom. Come on. Just how important personal relationships are. I thought that if you knew your stuff and you knew what you're doing and you did your job, that's that. But so much of it is kind of who you like and who you get along with, and you're more likely to reach out to people that you already have a relationship with and you can trust. And so I think it's really important to comport yourself in a professional and personable way, and reply to phone calls and reply to emails, and not be full of drama and angst every day, because you're going to get nowhere. You're not going to further your own career, and you're definitely not going to further the objectives of the agency or organization that you're working for.
Excellent. So I will say I've been surprised at the enthusiasm from outside of the organizations. I think that you can kind of understand why people who are working there and chose to work there are into it. But what I found throughout my career, everywhere I've worked, is that there's a real receptiveness to this idea that you can interact with government, that you can interact with nonprofit organizations, that your organization can do something to basically make people's lives better. And that for me is a very sort of glasses half full thing to think about all the time. That there's a lot of people out there who are just looking for their opportunity to be involved, and they see government or they see nonprofit organizations or they see public service as a way that they can do it, whether they're involved with it directly or whether they're not. And so that's something I think that is important for you guys to consider as you go forward with your careers, is that wherever you end up, there's an obligation involved, and that you should be thinking about the ways that you can do it if you're in government, and then the times when you're not in government, still sort of how can you make an impact. So with that, I think that the panel was phenomenal, and let's give them a big round of applause. I think Going from Chris Christie to Game of Thrones in a half an hour is pretty impressive. So I appreciate everybody's time, and good luck with your careers and everything else.